sometimes I consider walking around Target my exercise or trying on jeans because I have a lot of extra fat and wiggly stuff. So pulling them up, I'm doing a lot of wiggling. So maybe that's aerobics, like wiggling around. The other day I was walking around for like 2 hours and I was like, you know what? I think that is exercise.
Yeah,
I
sure.
didn't sit down. So I put that down as exercise to me.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's so good to see you two. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
All righty. On the show this week, how hard should I exercise? And I guess we should come clean, Andrea, right now before Dr. Cooper and say, maybe the question we think is, should I exercise? Because
For me, yeah.
a lot of days I'm like, I'm tired. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I think the reason that we really wanted to cover this is exercise as a topic is really confusing. Like, what is exercise? What should I be doing? What's the best exercise when it comes to my health? What's the best exercise when it comes to burning fat? Dr. Cooper, there's so much information out there. My head is just spinning. Why don't we just start with the very basics on this one? Like, what should we consider exercise to be?
You know, I think exercise is much more than what people think of. It's not just going to the gym and working out. It also is gardening and doing housework and anything where you're really exerting yourself, I think is physical activity is a term that's used a lot. So anything that's causing you to have to do some physical work would be considered exercise in my mind.
So that could be anything, right? I mean, in terms of stuff we build into our life. I mean, I started golfing with some guys who don't ride the golf carts, and they're like, yeah, we all walk. And I'm like, what?
Walking.
That's a
I think
workout.
walking is exercise. I don't know. Sometimes I consider walking around Target my exercise or trying on jeans because I have a lot of extra fat and wiggly stuff. So pulling them up, I'm doing a lot of wiggling. So maybe that's aerobics, like wiggling around. The other day I was walking around for like 2 hours and I was like, you know what? I think that is exercise.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't sit down. So I put that down as exercise to me.
I like it. And Targets are pretty big stores, Andrea.
It was really
you
big. It was the biggest one I'd ever been in. It was in New Jersey.
So, Dr. Cooper, we can talk about how to integrate exercise into our daily life, but I think we should talk now about what does the average person need to know about what kinds of exercise we should do on a regular basis. What does that look like, and how do we determine that?
Well, it's good to keep in mind that some studies have shown that doing like a single workout and then the rest of the day being very sedentary is not as beneficial for your health as just having an active lifestyle. So just putting that out there. So if you're one of those people that's always moving around and going for short walks or doing housework, doing gardening, all of that throughout the day, you're probably getting more health benefit out of your exercise than somebody who maybe does like a 30-minute workout every day and the rest of the day is sedentary. So it's just something to think about. So there's just so much flexibility when it comes to physical activity and exercise and how to increase that in your life. It should be fun. If it's not fun, you really will not stick to it. But it is good to understand that there is kind of an introductory period where everyone feels a little bit like it's not that great. It's a little bit harder. It makes them feel more tired. But then after a few weeks of habitually being active, you start to feel a reduction in what's called perception of exertion, like the perceived exertion level, and it feels easier. So if you can kind of make it through that first few weeks and don't try to do too much at once, then you're more likely to sustain the activity over time.
I feel like it's human nature to overdo this stuff, especially after the first of the year when we all on our resolution list is, join a health club, and then we overdo it and then we give it up. Andrea, for people who don't know your background, you started dieting, so to speak, at around 8 or 9 years old. You've been on every diet in the book. When you would go to doctors, and exercise, I'm guessing, was part of their quote, solution, what did they tell you to do, and what did you try doing across all those years?
Well, funny enough, I mean, they used to always say, diet and exercise, but they really focused on the food way more than the exercise part. I mean, the food was way more of cut back on your eating, cut back on your eating. Oh, and exercise. And I mean, we've talked about my fantastic experience at Slenderella, where my mother and I joined. You can't call it a gym. I mean, it was a lovely place where the machines exercised for us. And we just sat on them and they did all the little exercises for us, which, I mean, I still think was fantastic, although it did nothing. It promised lots of inches gone from the waist, but it didn't really work. But they would say, join a gym, join a gym. It didn't really work. A friend of mine did do something really kind of crazy. He was like, I have this great trainer. I met at Pilates. He's coming to your house tomorrow at 7:30, and you'll see if you like him. And as crazy as that sounds, having the trainer was the best thing ever. It just ended up being kind of expensive. I loved having him because it was kind of like a built-in alarm clock. He would come, we would work out for an hour and a half, 3 days a week, and it was fantastic. So I do think that, although everybody makes fun of all the LA people and their trainers, it was really great because you can't say no to somebody who's at your door. I mean,
and you've paid a lot of money.
And you paid a lot of money to get, and your friend sent him and he knocks on your door, and it was fantastic. I mean, so that was probably the best exercise experience. And I think that consistently doing the exercise and like Dr. Cooper said, having fun doing it, that was probably the only time I really had fun.
That's awesome.
Doing it.
So, Dr. Cooper, I think there are two basic reasons that we even consider exercise. I think all of us want to live longer and live healthier lives. And then some of us want to lose body fat as a motivation for exercise. So let's break down the health component first. What kinds of exercises, like when we talk about cardio and all that stuff, let's start there with what makes the most sense?
Well, again, physical activity does produce health benefits, even if it's not the formal workouts that we think about. So any type of physical activity is going to enhance our health, our current health, and then our future health in terms of cardiovascular health. There's a lot of other benefits, metabolic health in general. But as you get further into the different types of exercise, say endurance exercise versus strength exercise, in the studies, they're starting to see that the benefits aren't that different between them, which was surprising because we think of strength exercise as bone density and just quality of life, being able to lift more, play with your grandkids more, chase after your kids more, things like that in terms of the strength training. But now they're seeing that we do get some cardiovascular benefit also from strength training, and we do get the metabolic benefits too in terms of helping to reduce the risk of insulin resistance and diabetes. So I think instead of getting hung up on the exact type of exercise or what exactly you're going to do, it's good to just start thinking about, again, what sounds like it would be fun, and what about my personal health would make me choose one thing over another. And if there are concerns about family history of osteopenia, osteoporosis, maybe it really is good to be incorporating your strength training or some type of resistance into your exercise. Doesn't mean you have to lift weights necessarily. It could be a sport that involves strengthening, such as swimming. You're doing a combination of cardio, so what's good for your heart, because it can be endurance, and also resistance, like the water resistance. And there are a lot of activities like that that can combine the strength and cardio in one.
I feel like Instagram is doing a really good job of spying on us these days. Because Dr. Cooper, I keep getting these videos of dudes about my age with no shirts on doing exercises that require absolutely no equipment. They're like on the floor doing these squats and stretches and turns and they're completely ripped. And I'm like, man, I wish my body looked like that. But I guess what I'm hearing you say is that, I mean, even lifting weights makes your heart beat fast. And, you know, so your body, I think, kind of likes the variety, right?
Yeah. And there is something called cross training for people who are getting to be more and more athletic to prevent injury and, you know, to help prevent overuse. It's really good to vary your activity. So even biking and walking, or biking and hiking, or biking and running, instead of just one sport versus the other, that can be very helpful to prevent injury risk and to get a little bit more broad benefit out of the activities. But people have that mentality, all or nothing. And that is where I think I see the biggest errors in terms of trying to build fitness, because we make the most progress building our fitness if we do small incremental increases over time instead of big amounts. Like sometimes you can't avoid it, because if you have a busy job during the week and you really don't have time, you do become that weekend warrior where you have to go out on the weekends and try to get your activity in. And especially here in the Northwest where it's beautiful, people will go on long hikes on the weekends when they are pretty sedentary during the week. And it could lead to more risk of injury doing that and not as much of a fitness benefit. I mean, it's still definitely beneficial versus nothing, but you could easily overdo it and get into some trouble that sets you back.
So when it comes to cardio, what's the deal with these zones? I hear there's blue ones, yellow colors. I don't know. I know from colors, but I don't know from zones.
Well, the zones, the reason why they're colors, like maybe it's red is like your maximal zone, orange, yellow. Some people will give it color attributes, but these are basically different stages of intensity when you're exercising. So if we test people, their cardiorespiratory fitness levels, which is also called VO2 max, aerobic fitness, we will take them through a series of increasing stages of intensity while monitoring a lot of things with their physiology. And so each of these stages represents a different physiologic demand on the body. And so if you train in at these different levels, you'll get a different output. And so it's very interesting to know what your zones might be, but not everyone can go do, these tests, and they are pretty individual. But there are some ways to kind of estimate it by just how it feels. And it's not something to poo-poo just because it's subjective. It actually does correlate quite a bit with what we measure in the lab. So in the lowest zone, which would be your warm-up and cool-down zone, that is very low intensity. So it just feels what's called very light exertion. And you're not at all challenged in that zone. You're just kind of starting to move. And that is a really good zone to be in when you're in the beginning of the workout, to just warm up your muscles, get your blood circulating. And at the end of the workout, to cool down and let your heart rate come back down to normal. So that would be what we call zone 1, or probably, I'm not sure what color we would call it. But then the next level up is just slightly more challenging. And so it might be light instead of like very light. Maybe it's light, and you still feel like you could do that forever and ever if your muscles don't, start complaining. And that is like a little bit more intense, like endurance warm-up type of level. And it's actually a really good zone to be in. It's what most people are in when they're walking. And, if they're not tackling hills or stairs. It actually has a lot of health benefits, especially in younger age people. For some reason, especially women over 40, it kind of changes what improves your fitness. But under 40, even being in that lower intensity zone is very, very beneficial health wise. And then up from there, it's a little bit harder. Like maybe it feels like it's somewhat hard, more challenging. And that produces a little bit more like workout for your heart muscle, because the heart is having to pump oxygen to your muscles to help your muscles produce more energy. And so it's more challenging but it's still in the aerobic zone, which means it's still an endurance level. So in that intensity, you can still carry on a conversation, but your breathing you could talk and carry on conversations, but you do need to breathe a little bit heavier. And then as you go up from there, you start to get into what's called anaerobic zones. And anaerobic is an area where it's not sustainable. So it becomes more and more difficult, and your breathing becomes harder and more labored. And so it's much harder to carry on conversations and that type of thing. And so each of these zones has a different health benefit. And contrary to what most people think, the anaerobic zones, if you train too much at that level, it actually is kind of detrimental to your health. And it is associated with increased risk of certain cardiovascular disease outcomes. So it's mainly because when you're training in that zone, the anaerobic system, which is the one, again, that doesn't use oxygen, that system trains much faster than the aerobic system. And it actually starts to weaken your aerobic system if you're in there too much. So that's why it's not all about train harder. It's more about be smarter about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes less is more.
And it sounds like each one of these levels, as you get up to short of that anaerobic zone,
Yep.
Really has benefits, because you're getting circulation throughout the body. You're getting oxygen throughout the body. In the note that you sent over, Dr. Cooper, which, by the way, was a PhD level email.
Yeah, I didn't understand a lot of it, I got to say.
What interested me, though, Dr. Cooper, is that I didn't realize our body draws on different sources of energy based on the different exertion level. Now, without getting to the PhD level, explain, if you would, that, because I had forgotten that there are so many different areas from which the body can draw calories.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Well, most of the fuel, once we get going, it's coming from within the muscle mass itself, stored fuel there. And when you get started exercising, your body's just getting revved up. The heart hasn't really started pumping out more blood flow to get that to the muscles. And at that point, just for the first very, very beginning of our exertion, we're using mostly carbs for energy. And then as our blood flow starts going and getting to the muscles and delivering more oxygen, the oxygen is required to burn fat. And again, that's fat that's stored in the muscle. And so we start to primarily burn stored fat from the muscle, and still carbohydrates, and also carbohydrates that are stored in the muscle as glycogen. So in the very early stages, the lower intensities, were predominantly burning those fats, because fat is a very good fuel for endurance. It's not the type of fuel that can abruptly increase on demand. And so that's why we also need to be burning the carbohydrates, which are really good at burning fast and quickly. And so we use a blend of both carbohydrate and fat stores, mostly from the muscles, that's stored in there for energy. And as the intensity increases, we need that faster fuel, which is the carbohydrates. And so that eventually becomes the predominant fuel instead of the stored fat as our intensity increases.
So we're talking about, we're exercising, let's say we're exercising really hard or really smart. We're not exercising hard, we're exercising smart and better. So which zone should we be in to burn my butt and Mark's belly?
Thank you.
Oh boy, I hate to disappoint you.
No zone? No zone?
No.
We got to be in all the zones?
No. It's so funny, but
Darn
that's kind of a misunderstanding about exercise altogether. once again, when you're exercising, you're really not burning your body fat, your adipose tissue. Adipose is where we store fat throughout our body, but in our muscles, we store it as what's called intramuscular triglycerides. That's purely to be used as a fuel. So that's not our belly fat or our butt fat, as you would say, Andrea. And so that's kind of a misunderstanding. And in fact, they've done lots of studies with like weight loss and exercise, and they have seen that doing resistance training prevents the body from losing muscle during like calorie deprivation, but it actually doesn't prevent the metabolism from slowing down due to the calorie deprivation, if that makes any sense. We've talked about how diets slow your metabolism down over time because of the body's natural defenses. And so they thought at first that doing strength training would stop the metabolism from slowing down from the diet. And then it turns out it doesn't stop that from happening, but it does help a person hold on to more lean mass. Now, we're not endorsing, of course, calorie deprivation, but that's what the science says.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess that really bursts, I think, a lot of people's bubbles, Dr. Cooper, because you're at the gym and the machine says you're in the fat burning zone. And you're thinking, oh, great, my belly's going to go away. But that's a different kind of fat.
Yeah, it's a different kind of fat. Now, if you're an ultra marathoner or an Ironman athlete or like a Pacific Crest Trail multi-day hiker, that kind of thing, you will over time start tapping into your adipose stores because your muscle triglyceride stores, it's a huge amount in there, but it starts to get assistance from the adipose tissue at a certain point. But that would be an unusual situation, not what most people are actually doing for their exercise training programs.
An upcoming episode of Beats Working features Dwayne Clark, the founder of Aegis Living. And I think, Dr. Cooper, you've met him before. He told a story of when he was in Italy, every morning when he was having his coffee, he saw an old woman who walked up an enormous hill in a sweater, and it was quite warm out. And every morning he was like, I wonder what this lady is doing. So one day he followed her and he went to the very, very top of this hill, and he saw her go into a market and then come out. And he ran into the market and he asked the storekeeper, why does that woman come here every day? He says, well, she buys a quart of milk. And he's like, what do you mean buys a quart of milk? He said, yeah, she buys a quart of milk, but she has to walk up the hill to buy the quart of milk. And she gives the quart of milk away to someone in the village. And she does it just as an excuse to walk up the hill. And he said, how old is she? And he said, 93.
Oh my God.
So here's a 93-year-old woman who found a way every day, a purpose and a meaning to walk up a huge hill in this village and then give a quart of milk to someone. And it just makes me realize that in our lives, when we build in, motion and activity and just have this activity mindset, I know the best health that I ever have been in, Dr. Cooper, is when there was a period when I just decided I'm going to walk every day. So I went on a 45-minute walk every day. It wasn't super strenuous, but it got me moving. And my belly fat actually went away during that period. So I don't know. As we start to wrap things up, Andrea, any advice from your end? And then we'll go to Dr. Cooper.
I think you got to keep it moving. It's like, I think that is a really good thing to know. And especially as we get older, which I am. And I like it's better than the alternative, as my mother used to say. Getting older, it has its drawbacks, but I do think that moving is a good idea. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, ugh, but keeping it moving is a good idea. But I think there's another thing that we sort of forgot to talk about that we should mention, because sometimes there are times when we shouldn't exercise. And that's something that, especially sometimes when you're first starting to get going on a plan or a program or whatever we call this with Dr. Cooper, she has told a lot of people not to exercise, and it blows their minds. So I think we should talk about that, because it really does freak a lot of people out, especially if they were serious exercises. Of course, me, I was like, oh, well, that's not a problem. but a lot of people, it really freaks them out.
Yeah, it's that is definitely true. It's a good point. Exercise in itself is, we think of it as so healthy, but we forgot to really talk about how important it is to fuel the exercise.
Oh yeah, that
Mhm.
was
Because
major.
yeah, because that, like, what makes exercise unhealthy? That's when you're not fueling it. And so I always, have this saying, if you can't fuel it, don't do it. And then the other thing that we think about is, for people that start doing a lot more and more exercise, I always challenge them to first think about, how much can you eat first? Decide that and figure that out. That will tell you how much you can exercise. Because we don't really think about the fact that if we don't have a solid nutrition foundation and then we go and start exercising, that's putting an increased demand on our body for fuel. And our body can perceive that as basically starvation. And then you can get into trouble with those famine signals elevating and the nutritional security signals decreasing. And that leads to, actually, what's strange, that could lead to actually prediabetes. People wouldn't imagine that could be possible, but it can, and increase stress hormones. You really won't improve your fitness, even though you're going through the motions. So some of our patients that come in, that some of them who've been very athletic and some who have just been trying to do those workouts for what they perceive as weight loss, which isn't, quote, working, we do have to tell them, hey, maybe you need to step back from these workouts and this exercise for a while, because based on, where your body is metabolically, it already is perceiving that you're starving. So then we like to start first building a nutrition foundation first, a solid daily nutrition foundation. And then once everything has stabilized better, it's like, okay, let's test it out. Start introducing some physical activity, see if your body seems to be tolerating that well. And then learn about sports fueling and sports nutrition. Are you doing workouts that really do require you to be focused on not just your daily nutrition, but what's called pre-workout, during workout, post-workout nutrition, and dial that in too. So that makes your body feel real secure. And I think it's real important, because studies have shown a lot that fueling exercise close to your expenditure, so buffering that activity with enough fuel, it really does affect your health, your stress hormones, your body composition, versus just going in there when you haven't had anything to eat for hours, jumping in and exercising. So there's a lot to it.
I think so many people wake up, go to the gym or do a workout or go for a run and don't eat before they do it. I think more people, at least that I know, don't eat before they work out.
Yeah.
And I think that from what you've told us, it makes such a difference. And I think in their stress situation, huge difference.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing that I've seen. People always say, oh, I exercise because it relieves my stress. And that makes me think of red flags, because, of course, when we do exercise, a lot of us do feel less stressed, with exercise. But if that's the primary reason that we do it, it becomes almost like a drug that you're taking to medicate yourself. And that can get you into trouble, because when are you stressed? If you haven't slept, there's a lot going on, you haven't eaten, so that's driving up your stress levels. And then if you go and put this extra demand of exercise on top of in your body when it's really not supported with fuel and rest, that backfires health-wise. And so I always try to have people find other ways to relieve their stress and not be hooked to exercise as that source. It's fine it's fine if you exercise and that is relieving your stress as a side effect, but don't do it for that reason. Try to find other things that are the reason, and make sure that you never, when you're feeling really stressed and you haven't slept well, you haven't eaten well that day, and then you're like, I'm just going to go for a run. I know it'll make me feel better. That's about the worst thing that you really could do.
I've noticed that the people who say that exercise relieves their stress are always the most stressed out people that I know. So it's not working. It's a vicious cycle. I feel like they're exercising themselves into more stress. So
Mm.
something is
Yeah.
not right.
And we've heard you say, Dr. Cooper, if you can get a couple of meals in before your daily exercise, that's probably optimal because you've got adequate fuel in the system. But
Yes,
again, I think, Andrea, I know so many people who get up first thing in the morning, they go
That's
to
what
the
they,
gym,
yeah.
they drink water, and that's tied to that fallacy that, oh, well, it's just calories in, calories out. It's going to be burning that belly fat off when we know that's not true. And I
right.
think when you said, Dr. Cooper, a lot of your patients, you tell not to exercise. And what I guess what I heard you hear is that the number one priority if someone has metabolic dysfunction is to get the brain to stop freaking out and thinking it's in a famine, right? So you just want to
Exactly.
work on the brain first and its feeling of safety. And then once that's secured, then you can go on to the rest.
Yes, because lots of our patients, have to go through a process of like getting them the diet mentality taken away, getting out of that. And that takes a little while. And so I have a lot of patients say, oh, no, I'm not restricting anything. And then I look at their food intake and I'm like, okay, there's no starches in here. So I'll say, well, where are the starches if you're not restricting them? They're like, oh, well, I ate like one serving of something. So that's where there's a disconnect. And so the first thing, it is the brain signals, but it's also the reliability of the person to fuel their body consistently and to learn the technique of doing that and the strategy before then adding on the exercise, because then that ends up being additional fueling you need to support the exercise. So it's the training period, and everybody's different because sometimes it's real hard to let go of that diet mentality for people because it has just grown into their lifestyle at such a degree,
Right.
they don't even realize it. So we go through a process of that with our dietitian often to help like undo the diet mentality and get people just eating in a normal ordered fashion throughout the day. And then once we feel confident that's stable, and then usually that correlates with the brain signals improving and all the metabolic parameters showing the evidence that the body's feeling more secure, that's where we start reintroducing exercise.
So, Dr. Cooper, we hear this 20 to 30 minutes of exercise 4 to 5 times a week or whatever. Is that generally a good idea?
Well, it's great. What they've noticed is actually any breakdown of incremental exercise is beneficial. So even 10 minutes is. So if you don't have time, it is thought that 150 to 180 minutes a week is the beneficial for health level of exercise. So physical activity, 150 to 180 minutes per week. But you can break it down any way you want. 10-minute increments, 20-minute increments, so that you could fit it in. And also the idea is to improve cardiovascular health and reduce cardiovascular risk. It's also recommended to add like 10 minutes of a more vigorous effort within that time frame, maybe once or twice a week. And so the bulk of it should be lower intensity, low to medium intensity activity, but then some efforts that are more challenging too, amounting to probably at least 10 minutes a week. But you have a lot of flexibility as to where you can put that time in.
Okay, I think it would be appropriate for us to do a lightning round. So I'm going to go around the circle and I'm going to ask all of us to come up with one way to add activity into our daily lives. Andrea, at the beginning of the program, said trying on jeans at Target was an awesome way to break a sweat. But I'm going to let you redeem yourself here, Andrea. What's one way we can add activity? And this is the lightning round. Go.
I think we can walk to coffee instead of driving to coffee.
Okay, Dr. Cooper?
With this weather starting to get better in the Northwest, I really want to get going and get out into the woods, the mountains, do some little hiking.
So I'm going to say, instead of finding the closest parking spot to a store, find the furthest and then walk. Okay,
Yeah.
Andrea,
Great.
one more, go.
I say walk around if you're shopping, walk around the mall 3 times instead of just walk to where you're going. Walk around and around and around and around.
Okay, Dr. Cooper.
I guess I have to take my dog for a little bit longer walk and not avoid the hills as much as I do sometimes.
Okay. And I'll finish with the golf analogy again. Boy, I'll tell you, if you always ride the golf cart and if you just try walking with a pull cart, it is an amazing workout. So over 3.5 hours, you are walking a long way. And
That's a lot of miles.
Feels good. All right. This has been so much fun. So I guess what we've learned today, Dr. Cooper, is if you're trying to burn your belly fat, or if Andrea is trying to burn,
My butt.
but thank you. Exercise is not the way to do it, but a complete program of health is. All right. This has been another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.